Hi, friends. This is John, and welcome back to the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast, where we have all kinds of fun conversations related to regenerating landscapes, regenerating ecosystems, regenerating our relationships at all levels throughout the supply chain. And ultimately, of course, we care about regenerating our planet and all the macro and micro pieces that entails. One of the pieces that is really important is connecting our relationships between from actual production and growing food to the people who eat that food. I think it's very, on one hand, as farmers, we often like to take pride in the mantra that we are feeding the world, while at the same time being completely isolated and having no connection to the people who are actually directly consuming our food. And so I've been looking forward to having a conversation with Mollie Engelhart, who does bridge that last gap and is able to have conversations with many people who care directly about the food that they are eating and able to offer some insights and some perspectives for us into that dynamic. So Mollie, thank you very much for being here today, for being willing to share some of your story and some of the things that you've been experiencing. Tell us a little bit about your history and your journey and the scope of the work that you're doing today.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much for having me. I've been a fan and a listener for a long time. I grew up on a farm in upstate New York, mostly apples, but I grew up vegetarian. My parents didn't eat meat, and I went to Los Angeles to pursue a film career. And long story short, I ended up owning restaurants, and I became a well-known vegan chef with big locations, multiple, uh, 4 or 5,000 square foot restaurants with full bar and huge, huge restaurants. And up until the pandemic, they were going well. But in 2000, and I want to say 13, I listened to a Graham Sate TED talk that really smacked me on the side of the head because I was in this illusion that I was in Los Angeles, living in my comfortable life, driving my hybrid and bringing grocery store bags to the grocery store and drinking an oat milk latte. And somehow I thought I was more righteous or better than other people, that I was doing the right thing for the planet. And Graham Sate in 12 minutes broke it down that I wasn't, and that the biggest cause of methane is actually food scraps. And so the first thing I thought is, oh, there's so much food scraps in my restaurant. I need to get those to a farm. And so I started telling everyone I knew that had enough money to buy some land that you should buy a farm. I'm going to bring all the food scraps and we can make compost. And then I'll buy the rest of the produce back at the restaurant. It's going to be this awesome circle. And then I realized I was the one that we were waiting for. There was nobody was going to buy this farm for me to compost my food scraps. So I bought a farm about an hour outside of Los Angeles, avocados and citrus primarily, and then vegetable row crops in between. We started planting, and so people are like, "Oh, you're gonna have a vegan farm," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna have a vegan farm." I don't. My husband just like rolled his eyes and let me go with my plan, and I just started to realize really quickly when I was actually growing my own food and food for my restaurants that there was no vegan farms, that it doesn't exist, and that nature is far harsher than anything human beings could possibly do. And the power of bovine and the power of the cow poop, like the difference in my compost once I got my first cow than before I had a cow, and the power of cow poop and soil and what that difference made. And then I'm breastfeeding my baby. I'm a prolific breeder. I have a bunch of kids, but so I'm always pregnant or breastfeeding. And I'm breastfeeding my baby, and then I'm like milking off the cow because she's engorged, and I'm feeding my kids Tetra packs of oat milk. And I'm like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. So I'm like, no more oat, no more milks. We're gonna feed the kids raw cow milk. If my breast milk is perfect and has all the antibodies from the environment, well, then so does Una's cow milk. So, and then this went on, and I still was not letting my husband kill any animals on the farm. I was crazy vegan mindset. And two things that shifted that for me were I had these khaki Campbell ducks, and they were beautiful. And I had a lot of ducks. They would make more ducks, and I never killed any of the drakes. And then I got these brand new 19 khaki Campbell ducks, and I put them out in the avocado orchard to eat the snails. And there was beautiful rain that day and tall grass. And I remember seeing them all waddle into the grass and feeling so good about how my ducks are eating my snails and fertilizing the orchard and everything. And I got home from work that day and my husband's like, "You're not going to like what happened." And the drakes had raped all 19 to death, like just continued to mate them until they died because the ratio of drakes to females was too high. And I called my dad so upset and wanting that it could work, that there could be some way to have a farm without death. And my dad, who's also a farmer, and he said, "Honey, that's just a silly idea that someone has sold us. It doesn't exist. We're part of nature, and there's going to always be death. In nature, the males are cast out and they can't be with all the females because you can't have that equilibrium that we're trying to have." And so the next day I said, "Somebody kill those boys." And so they 23 drakes got turned into food that following day. And that was that first time that I had allowed that to happen. And the next big thing for me is the neighbor dogs came and killed my whole herd of baby doll sheep. We had vineyard and hops. We grow hops as well. And we were grazing these sheep in the vineyard and in the hops. They're very short, little stout sheep that can't get on their hind legs, and they're good for grazing in orchards and stuff. And they got all killed by two neighbor dogs without any bite of them to be eaten. They didn't eat any part of it. And I was so frustrated and angry, and they were still just had happened. And my husband just ran into action, got a gun, shot the two that were still alive. He strung them up, he skinned them, he harvested as much as he could. And I remember thinking, wow, that's actually honoring their life so much more. And carload and carload, my husband is Mexican and he's worked in the restaurant industry in LA for his whole life. And carload after carload, families showed up and we sent them with 5-gallon buckets of meat to take home and freeze. And because it was so many sheep all at one time. And I remember thinking, wow, that really actually was honoring their life more than if I had just dumped them in the compost pile. And that would have been fine too. It would have been part of the system. And so that's how I got to where I went from a vegan chef to a regenerative farmer. And then very recently, what happened is I switched my restaurants. Yesterday, we launched the new regenerative menu. And so the vegan community is super angry with me after 13 years of having these vegan restaurants in Los Angeles. And the larger community is kind of like, "What's regeneration? What does that mean? Why does your hamburger cost $26?" And so we're in this new territory. And we had to sell our farm in California because of economic reasons. The restaurant industry in Los Angeles, we were closed down because of the bad policies around COVID. And so we were shut down, no indoor dining for years. And so it was very hard to recover. So we sold our house and our farm and we moved to our land in Texas. And so we're doing larger scale regenerative agriculture in Texas, in the hill country, and we are also running our restaurants from here. And so that's a little background of how I went from vegan chef to regenerative cattle farmer in the Texas hill country.
So you do still have your restaurants in LA?
I'm in my restaurant in LA right now. We launched the new menu yesterday and we're partnering with a bunch of great people, Stimple Creek and Force of Nature and Origins Regenerative Dairy out of Ohio. We've moved away from any seed oils, so we're using, for the vegan option for oil, we're using 0 acres, and we're using Fatworks 100% grass-fed tallow as the meat option fryer. And then we're, really Oatman's Flats. Our pizza crust is Oatman's Flats and all of that. So we really upgraded the level of the ingredients, not just saying organic, but it's not every single thing is regenerative because it's not there yet. We're just not there. Even just to get all these items into my restaurant, we've had to create relationships with, okay, Cisco, can you bring this in? Or US Foods, can you bring this in? But I think that just by me doing this, other chefs are going to see it on their list and be like, oh, I could get regenerative flour, or I could get fully pastured whole chickens from Big Bluff Ranch as we bring them into these systems. So it does take somebody saying, I'm going to do this so that other people then can just bring in one item or two items. So that's where we're at today. We're in day 2 of the first regenerative kitchen in Los Angeles, which was a vegan restaurant for the last 13 years.
So you've mentioned a couple of times that people are really angry. What are they angry about? Where's the anger coming from? What is the frustration coming from? In other words, I guess the question I'm asking is, what is the nature of the negative reactions that you're getting from people?
I believe that when someone is angry, we have to look at what they're committed to that's not happening and to see their commitment. Because usually when we're angry, it's because something that we expected has been thwarted and we're committed to something that's different than what's happening. So I think that people are committed to the welfare of animals and they don't actually see that by me supporting Force of Nature and Stimple Creek and Big Bluff Ranch and other regenerative farmers, I'm actually doing more for the welfare of animals than just not eating meat. But they cannot see that right now because they've been told the lie that we could just not eat meat and we're doing less harm. And that lie, I believed that lie too. And so I have to say that I understand that it feels real to them. And it's very confronting when we identify with something. If you identify with, I am a Republican, I am a Democrat, I am a vegan, I am a blah, 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 blah. When we think our identity is that thing that we're saying, our identity is like in our heart and with God. But when we identify with something outside and then information is pushing up against that identity, it feels like you have to defend your own self. You have to, it's almost like me saying, after 46 years of not eating meat and 13 years of owning a vegan restaurant, me saying regenerative agriculture is far more important than not eating meat on your plate. That is pushing up against what feels like people's identity.
So, of course, change is uncomfortable, and changing your identity is extremely uncomfortable. So, what does the nature of the conversations look like? You have the opportunity to be in a very pivotal role, and as a leader in this space in LA, what does the communication look like, and what does the messaging look like? In other words, how are you hoping to get your customers to a different place?
In full honesty, I'm going to lose some customers. Yesterday, people walked out of the restaurant, but I'm holding space for people's upset. I'm speaking with compassion and I'm reminding them that I too believed the things that they believe and that wisdom is to believe something wholeheartedly. But when something else makes more sense, we must be willing to shift our belief. And that's the space I'm trying to hold. Do I get triggered when people say, I hope your kids die of cancer and a slow, terrible death? And I do feel frustrated when people say stuff like that because I also believe that we're children of God and our thoughts and our speech and our beliefs and our actions and our attitudes have energetic effect in the world. And so I'm wanting to be mindful of that. But all I can do is respond with love and continue to say, I'm still the same person and I still care about the welfare of animals. And I recognize that the way we're going with industrial agriculture, monocropping, and what I would call the degenerative organic system, as well as the traditional degenerative system, is causing untold harm that is beyond anything that people can understand unless you're in the space and you're listening to all of the thought leaders and then connecting the dots between all these thought leaders. I have young children. I want my sons to be able to have children. I want my sons to be able to get married, make love with their wife, and have a child in the natural and normal way. And the path that we're on doesn't include that.
Many people are unwilling to take a serious look at the trajectory that we're on from a fertility perspective and acknowledging the risks that exist. What is happening now? I mean, we are not at replacement birth rate now. When we look at the overall health epidemic, that is happening in the US and in Western civilization generally, but particularly in the US. One of the stats that really caught my attention and almost makes you want to vomit when you really think about it is that post 1980, children born post 1980 are not expected to outlive their parents.
But it's already happening. But it is
Exactly.
very, my husband's father died like a month and a half ago, but his grandfather only died last year.
Right.
And so my grandmother died 4 years ago. I was pregnant with my third child, and she passed away. And her oldest daughter, Barbara, died 6 months later. Grandma died at 96, and Barbara died of some lung disease that didn't exist, also barely existed. And I think it's from all the chemical stuff. They don't know, it's untreatable. And she died, drowned, a terrible death. And at just 70. And so this is they're saying it for 1980, but I'm seeing it in my own family today where the kids are dying within 6 months, within a year. And interesting, people are adding a clause to their will that says if their children die within 2 years of them dying, that they like hold the money and then do it that way, so that if someone just is going to die right away and it's not going to be utilized or whatever. My grandmother put it in because she knew Barbara was sick and didn't want like collection agencies or whatever. But people are even aware of this, that their children are dying, and there's new language going into wills about what happens to the money if someone dies in quick succession to their parents. It's very, very scary. And people are still of the mindset overpopulation. I have a fair amount of people on social media that follow, and people are angry when I had my third child. I'm now up to five. So, but how dare you and your husband, one for you and one for him is plenty. This is ridiculous. And at what point is, and conscious conception and all these things. And I'm of the belief it's not up to me. I'm of the belief that if God wants me to have more children, then I will. And if I'm done having children, I will not get pregnant, and that it's not up to me to do anything about it. That's my belief. But so I'm 46. I'm probably done, but I don't know. I don't know. I have a 1-year-old that's still breastfeeding, and I guess until my fertility comes back from breastfeeding, I will not know. But I've had kids in quick succession for the last 10 years, and I think I'm so grateful for that. I lived in Los Angeles, in a city with high levels of pollutants. I waited very long. Grew up in that era where there was like almost an energy of you don't need a man and you can do anything, he can do better. And I was very career oriented and I was very successful. And I'm just grateful to God every day that I didn't lose my opportunity for the greatest gift of my life, which is to be a mother. And that not only did I not lose my opportunity by having my first child at 37, I still was able to have a lot of children. And so I'm ultimately so grateful for that. But it's not that way for everybody. And I look around at my girlfriend group. I have a lot of girlfriends that I believe they're in their 40s, they're not in relationships, and I don't believe that they're going to be able to have children. And I'm sad for that. I recognize who I was when I believed that my career was so valuable and important, but I cannot snuggle a career. I cannot look at my career with like the utmost pride and adoration. You just cannot. And even I have a big son that we adopted from Guatemala, and he was already a teenager when I adopted him. And I still have so much joy and pride from, he's so into regenerative agriculture. If people want to follow him, it's Osmar_journey. Every day he's moving the sheep and moving the goats and moving the cows. And he's just like so inspired about it. And what are the chances that someone that grew up in Guatemala would find me in Los Angeles and I would be able to adopt them and they would be so inspired about this. And it's actually regenerative agriculture that brought us together because he came here as an unaccompanied minor to reunite with his parents, and he got sick. And so he Googled, can the USA food make you sick? He was having high blood pressure and he was having migraines and he was having high cholesterol. And he found Dr. Mark Hyman on the internet. And then he found John and Mollie, Biggest Little Farm, and they said he was too young to volunteer. And apparently we didn't have an age limit on our volunteer days. And so he showed up for a volunteer day on my farm during the pandemic and he never left. He left that day and then came back the following weekend and never left. And we ended up adopting him and going through court and everything. And I'm his legal mother now. But what are the chances that his biggest, greatest passion in life is regenerative agriculture and he would find me and I would adopt him? So all versions of motherhood that I have, I'm so grateful for, but there was a really good chance that I would not have that. And so not only do we have the fertility issue to deal with that we're not on replacement rate, we also have the cultural conversation that's not really preparing women for motherhood and the surrender that it takes to be a mother. And the truth is we cannot be a great career woman and a great mother. I know that I'm short of a great mother and I'm short of a great restaurant owner because I'm doing both. And I don't really have a choice. I was already doing one thing when I started doing the other thing, and economically we couldn't just stop it. But we aren't raising our daughters to say the surrender of motherhood is the greatest gift and the greatest sacrifice that you're ever going to make. And we're not preparing them for that. Even the slogan, my body, my choice, whatever side you stand on abortion, that slogan is the opposite of motherhood.
It's a very selfish perspective. Yeah.
This morning, I've changed diapers, wiped butts, made love with my husband, and, all before I could take a shower or drink a sip of coffee. Like my body belongs to the commons of my family. It has nothing to do with my body, my choice. I have a teething baby. Like there's nothing about my choice. It's all about her. We're raising people to think that if anything is uncomfortable, you shouldn't have to do it. And the reality is like everything is uncomfortable. Everything worth doing is uncomfortable. Comfort is a silly thing to chase. And so when it comes to the fertility thing, it's not just that we're destroying chemically castrating all of us with all of the chemicals. We're also not training men to stick by no matter what, and women the level of sacrifice that is required.
Wow, Mollie. I think that must be approaching the limit of the monologue that's been on the podcast. But it was wonderful. No, it was good. That's why I let you coast. It was good. And I will just summarize simply by saying that I don't readily express a lot of the cultural sentiments that you're describing because I come from a very different cultural background, but I'm very much in alignment with what you are describing. We started this conversation. On several occasions, you made comment about the negative reactions that you are getting from your historical customer base. And I'd like to flip that around. What are some of the positive reactions that you've been getting from both from your customer base, but perhaps from other people in your community as well? What have the positive aspects of the shift looked like? And maybe it's too early to tell yet.
No, there's been some a bunch of people have said like we were vegan and that you were our special spot and my first date, and then moved away from seed oils, so we stopped eating there, and now we're so excited to be able to come back and get tallow fries, or we're so excited that you've added meat to the menu because we're eating meat. And other people have reached out and said, I never eat out anymore because I do eat meat, but I really want it to be of the level of quality that I believe. I only want to give my money to what I believe in. I want to vote with my dollars. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that in a dining out experience because I miss that. And so all of those have been positive. There's a woman, the Real Foodologist, I think is her podcast, Courtney Swan. She came and we did a little video right in front of the restaurant just saying why I was changing. I believe that regenerative agriculture is better for everyone, including the animals. And I mean, it went viral, like 400,000 views. And the responses were both, upset and also just, thank you for speaking up. I'm surprised how many people have said it's courageous, because I don't know that I think it's courageous. If I had done it when we were doing $7 million a year and I was flourishing, that would have been courageous. Right now, when my back is against the wall and I'm trying to survive, it's not that courageous. Honestly, I should have done it sooner. And I was afraid. In all honesty, I was afraid. And my My biggest, I guess, gift in my entrepreneurialness is that I can be afraid and still take the next step. And so that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I'm smiling because the position that you describe is exactly the position that many farmers first begin and develop an interest in regenerative ag is when their back is against the figurative wall and they have to figure out a different pathway forward. So, yes, there is still something to lose, and yet, on the other hand, if you continue down the pathway that you're on, you have a much higher probability of losing.
Yes.
Time to try something different. Speaking of trying something different, I do want to get into some of the agriculture and farming aspects as well, but you've mentioned on a couple of occasions that you have eliminated or are in the process of eliminating seed oils. And this is my wife is a very gifted natural health practitioner, and I've been paying fairly close attention. Well, I've been passionate about food issues since the beginning. But for those who are less familiar with the conversation around seed oils, and this is a topic that might be uncomfortable for some farmers because, after all, we grow hundreds of thousands of acres of canola and sunflower and mustard, and kind of the list goes on and on. What are the challenges with seed oils?
Well, my understanding is it's mostly in the processing, like that something like a sesame seed, you can just press it and you can see that there's oil in it. But some of these processes are very industrial, and the product that's coming out is not really food anymore. And it's causing a lot of issues inside of the body. It's also calcifying our pineal gland, causing cataracts and eye degeneration. And I think that I had 20/20 eyesight my whole life and had a pretty sharp decline at 40 in my eyesight. And I think it's from years of eating vegan food that's filled with seed oils. It's also causing clogging, although we were told for many, many years that it doesn't clog your arteries. There's a lot of evidence now showing that the seed oils are what's clogging our arteries and causing buildup of plaque. And if you look at the Western A price stuff, there's many stuff that's showing the amount of animal fats and animal proteins that a kid is getting, the better their teeth are. And I have an unfortunate experiment where I have two kids where I was vegan during the pregnancies and two kids that were not. And so I'm seeing it play out in real time. And I think it's true that unfortunately, I think that my two older kids are going to need braces, and my two younger kids probably not. And then you look at when we brought in the first seed oils, it was after World War, I don't know which one, but it was
Second World War.
and it was the Industrial Revolution. We had all of this essentially lubricant and motor oil that we needed to figure out what to do with now that we weren't at war. And so Crisco was invented and these other kind of fat alternatives. And there was huge amounts of financial push behind them to say that they were healthier and to not eat lard and to not eat tallow. And we switched. But if you look at the health decline from then to now, it's terrible. And you can see that it's not just one thing. Seed oils, excessive vaccinations, the spraying of wartime chemicals on our foods, all of these things happened kind of in conjunction with each other. And they kind of, it was like one in the 50s and then the 60s and then the 70s. And you can see that our health declined and then to the 80s. And then in 1996, we started spraying Roundup prior to harvest. There, all of those things, you can look at any kind of chart of our health. And so, is it any one of those things? Like people will say it's the vaccines, people will say it's the seed oils, people will say it's the agricultural chemicals,
We are products of our ecosystem. It's the entire ecosystem.
but it's all of those things
Yep.
combined that we've stopped eating foods in their whole form. And so, I like to think about it that if we could just get back to eating things the way they were. So if olives, you could just press them and get the oil out of them. I did grow olives before I sold my place in California. You could go to the press and they literally put it through and you can taste the olive oil. It's just, it's no extra steps, you know? When you see something like that, okay, that's just a fairly whole food. But when you have to refine it and centrifuge and we're really not eating a whole food in the way that nature gave it to us. And so my approach to health and to the new menu is that I'm trying to get more and more foods to be just in their whole form that you can imagine. I can imagine what a cow looks like, and this is the knuckle of the cow cut into carne asada. Okay. I can imagine what kale looks like growing, and now this is sauteed with lemon and garlic, but not things that are no longer recognizable because they're just one component pulled out of the natural thing. That's what I'm trying to get to because I think that there's no way that that's not healthier. You can look at the ecosystem, I look at the field and the farm, and you can see that everything is healthy based on eating the things they're supposed to eat in nature.
When you were describing the transition of the restaurant and all the direct outreach that you made directly to farms and to your other providers, Cisco and so forth, you mentioned that there are a number of ingredients or a number of pieces that you simply are unable to source as of this point. And so within that context, what are some of the opportunities that you see? What are some of the pieces that just you haven't been able to source in the mainstream supply chain at this point?
Rice. We have organic rice from Lundberg in California or Texas, but not regenerative. And then I'm looking for a mayonnaise with no seed oils that comes in food service sizes. They exist. It exists in small jars, but it doesn't exist in big sizes, in food service sizes. And then the regenerative dairy space is really small and it almost maybe needs to be small. I actually think that the dairy, in order to do dairy regeneratively, we actually have to move to a smaller, decentralized system, likely. I'm sure there's people doing it big. I'm not talking bad about anybody, but I know we move our dairy cows every day and we walk them out to wherever the rest of the heifers are or the open girls are and then walk the girls back. And that takes labor. It takes, you can't, I don't know that you could do it on a huge scale. I only have about 30 dairy cows. And we're maybe have 10 or whatever in milk at a time. But we walk them from whatever paddock that they're at back to the milking room. Or my other idea is that if we could do change the laws so you could milk, because you could have a mobile milking room just like you have a mobile chicken hut or whatever, but it's not legal to sell the milk that way. But I do think that to do dairy really regeneratively, that we need some either law changes or we need to make it smaller and decentralized. But so cream cheese, regenerative cream cheese in a food service size, and regenerative flour I'm getting from Oatman's Flats, but they're all whole grain. And for pizza, I need to like cut it with a white flour. So I would need right now we're just using organic from Italy for the pizza and then cutting it with the Oatman's Flats flour. So those are some of the things. And with our beer, we're really working on getting other breweries to care about regenerative and organic because to do a malting process, we need a lot of grain to be, they're not going to just do a little bit.
So when you look at the challenges that you're seeing on the supply chain as a chef and also with your perspective as a farmer, where do you see the opportunities in farming? It sounds to me like your attraction to the farming space was not just purely economics driven, but also driven to an extent, I suppose you could say by the word idealism, but I'm sure there's probably a better word, but by a sense of the opportunity and the need that is present in that space. But where do you see the opportunities for existing farmers across the country to transition and to have a significant impact and to have a significant market?
I mean, I think that in the meat market, obviously, I think that that's an easier lift, like moving the animals every day. And if someone's already doing, like, for example, my neighbor in Texas, he has like thousands of acres that he has a lease on, and he only has about 50 cows. And the way he's doing it, and then they cow calf. So then once they have babies, there's 100, and then, but he could have so many more cows if he moved his cows every day and he did some regenerative practices, but he kind of just leaves them there for 3 months and then leaves them there for 3 months and leaves them there for 3 months. And so I think that the meat market obviously is a lot of space, but the grain area I think is huge and could be really huge, and not just because you can integrate animals in through the winter and have it be regenerative, but also as people are waking up to what it is to have so much Roundup in our diet, I think if we can market the grains as been tested for no glyphosates or whatever parts per million below, I think that mothers are starting to wake up to that and wanting that.
At the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned your customers at the restaurant asked the question is, why does your hamburger cost $26? And I have a kind of a group of questions that is wrapped around this. What are the implications for you as leading chef and restaurateur in the LA area? What is your potential to shift the marketplace dynamics in that local region and across a broader region as well? And then, kind of related to that question, let's pause there and I'd love to get your reaction to that. How do you see the market evolving and shifting in response to the work that you are doing? What does the future look like?
Well, if we can survive, I think that the future is bright. When I opened my vegan restaurant, I was like the first large scale vegan restaurant with a bar, like a big restaurant where you could come with your whole family and there's something for everyone. And I came up with this dish that was buffalo cauliflower, where we breaded and fried cauliflower and tossed it in buffalo sauce. At that time, nobody was doing that. And if you look across the country now, it's everywhere. You can buy it in a bag at Trader Joe's in the frozen food department. California Pizza Kitchen has it. I mean, the amount of restaurants that have a buffalo, some kind of breaded, fried buffalo cauliflower is immense. And so the ripple effect of me making this one dish that was really popular on this vegan menu that nobody else was doing went out everywhere. So I believe that if I can start to bring in these meats, and even some of the choices I made about what meats I was doing was because True Foods had already brought in the bison sausage. So okay, that was the bison sausage from Force of Nature was already accessible to me. So I'm gonna add that to my menu because it's an easy lift. So I think that then other chefs say, oh, I want to have a regenerative option. There's bison sausage. It's already there at Vitco Foods. I can already get it. And so as we bring in these more things, more chefs will do that. And the ripple effect, hopefully, no matter what happens to my restaurant, the ripple effect for the regenerative farmers is big. And someone has to be that first person and be going through the extra effort of getting it FedEx in the beginning and then knowing what your pars are and then getting the food company to bring it in. For right now, I had to order 3 pallets of whole chickens, $12,700, because there's nobody carrying of the Big Bluff Ranch's chickens. Chicken farming in itself is a little hard for me to swallow. Like it just doesn't seem that great as far as the level of death, the lifespan, all of those things. But he's doing it really, really great. And so that was the only place I wanted to get chickens from. And he doesn't have any distribution. And so I had to come up with $12,600, come up with freezer space, and agree to buy an entire flock of chickens, bones and everything, because they don't sell just the breast or just, and we live in a culture where we think you can just buy the breast, you can just buy the this, or you can just buy, well, that even itself is kind of this disconnected from the farm, because my husband would never kill a chicken on our farm and then only eat only have the breast. Like he makes a plan for the week. So if he's going to harvest some chickens and puts them in the freezer, or if he's going to pull out some chickens from the freezer, he makes a plan that he's making whatever dinner for chicken now, and then we're going to have ramen with chicken broth or whatever the next night or and so on. Like he's going to make a plan for that whole body, and we don't live like that. And so all of that, but I think by bringing these things in, other chefs will say, "Oh, I can do that," or other bakers will say, "Oh, let me try this regenerative flour from Oatman's Flats." And my hope is that the ripple effect is big. And my hope is that regenerative farming is kind of where organic farming was in the 80s, and that we're going to have a really big adoption over the next 20 years. That's my hope. And that's why I'm doing this.
Yeah, we live in a very different time from the 80s in a couple of different ways. One of them is the macroeconomic climate is has some similarities, but also some important differences. But one of the key differences is that we now have technology that facilitates large audience communication. And if there is a desire to learn, there is a free flow of information to a much greater extent than what existed in the 80s. And so what I see happening, I wasn't around during the 80s transition, or at least not aware of what was going on. But when I talk to the pioneers who were present then versus what they see now, the transition and the evolution is occurring much faster. There's a much faster pace of adoption and of revolution, if you will, because of the speed of flow of information.
And I think people are more willing with regenerative than I see more old school farmers being willing to take on this technology.
Well, I think in my supposition is that in the 80s, there was still, Rachel Carson had published Silent Spring. There were some early indicators of the challenges of pesticides in the environment and ecosystems and so forth. But there was still the opportunity to be somewhat in denial of it and to believe that chemistry is the solution to all problems. And today we have a growing societal level realization that, we had better take care to not soil our nest any further.
I hope that that's happening. Sometimes I feel like everybody's just out there talking about carbon and selling electric cars and solar panels and windmills. And I'm kind of the canary in the coal mine saying, like, hey, we're all getting sick. What's going on? Why are we? But I hope that that's true. I hope that we're societally realizing that we're poisoning ourselves. But sometimes I feel like the larger conversation is all based on carbon or selling something, selling some solution rather than actually making the micro adjustments and macro adjustments that need to be made to move away from chemicals.
The follow-up question that I had to the earlier question of your opportunity for impact in the restaurant space is a question on the cost of food and the cost of a burger. And there is this argument that gets made sometime that, or this question that gets raised, is regenerative agriculture and organic agriculture only for those that are wealthy, only for those that can afford it, or can it be something, is there really the opportunity for it to go mainstream and to compensate farmers well while it goes mainstream? That's, I think, the conundrum. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've been known to say this very unpopular thing that I often get told that it's privilege, regenerative agriculture is privilege, organic agriculture is privilege. I believe that it's a privilege to eat cheap food that someone else was poisoned directly to grow for you. And so the farm workers that are dying of cancer, having miscarriages, having all types of other health concerns, we don't necessarily see it because many of them come here for 5 years, 10 years, and go back to their country of origin. But I see it firsthand in the community and in California, especially. People are sick that are spraying these chemicals. I had a woman that cleaned my house, and she was a group of 6 women. They were very fast at picking strawberries, and they would pick strawberries for much of the year. They would work as a team, and they were very fast. 5 of those 6 women all had some kind of cancer, and they all also had miscarriages at some point while harvesting strawberries. Now, I've had miscarriages. I don't harvest strawberries. I'm not saying that that's necessarily, this is anecdotal information, but what I'm saying is it is a privilege to eat cheap food that the people that are harvesting it and growing it are being poisoned to produce for you, is the one thing. The other thing is part of the cost is the getting it here. Part of the cost is that the supply chains are not fully put together. And if we could get more regional in our way of eating, and I know this is not the direction we're going, we're fully centralizing everything to our own detriment, trading resilience for convenience every day. But I think that if we could get people to be doing hub and spoke food production for their specific areas, we could bring the cost down significantly. But that is not the direction we're going, and it would take a major turn to the left or the right. We all know the numbers of these different states where they're a 90% agricultural state. The land is all in agriculture, but they're also importing 90% of their food, which means they're not growing anything that's good for human consumption at the end of the harvest. It needs to go somewhere to be processed and turned into something else.
It is a privilege to eat cheap food that has been grown by exploiting other people and other ecosystems. That is such a powerful statement. I think we could call it a wrap right there, and it would be a home run.
People do not like that statement, just so you know. I've gotten a lot of hate for that statement, but I will continue to
But it's so true.
say it because I know so many people in my husband was undocumented when we got married. I have a very large Latino community in Los Angeles that works in the farming space, and the amount of people that go back to home and end up with cancer and other lung diseases and other sicknesses after working in 10, 20 years in the agricultural space, and then we don't see it, it's out of our face, it's they're back in their country of origin being sick, is a lot. And we have to realize that there is real human cost to eating cheap food.
Yeah.
Nobody should have to put on a gas mask and a zip up thing to protect themselves from something they're spraying on our food. It's just not what we want our food to be, sans chemicals.
I think the whole point of regenerative agriculture is that not only is there a human cost, but there are also significant ecological and environmental and ecosystem costs that are externalized that we generally don't get to see, just as what you're describing, we're also externalizing the long-term health consequences of foreign farm workers.
Yes.
But the thing is, we are internalizing the cost. Recent conversations with Bobby Kennedy, just realizing we're spending 3 times more on our health budget in the US than we are on our military spending, which is already astronomical. It's like, you wait, say what? These are internal costs. These are collective societal costs that agriculture is, as you pointed out earlier, it is not solely responsible for. Agriculture isn't the only contributor, but it is a significant contributor.
Yes. One day I was walking down the street. I was walking a cow. I had taken her to get bread at the neighbors, and I was walking back in California, and I was looking at this sterile orchard that Roundup had been sprayed, and there was not a single thing on the ground, and there's lemons growing and avocados. And I remember thinking, because I've been pregnant a lot in the last several years, about cesarean birth and that the health impacts of original microbiology not coming from being pressed through the vagina, the birth canal, coming in contact with the anus, and all of that, that puts our original microbiology in us and being pulled out and coming into this sterile room. And then you look at our food system and it's sterile in that same way. And so there's plenty of studies showing that cesarean birth versus vaginal birth has long-term health consequences. And it's sort of the same. We're growing all of our food in these very sterile environments, and there's long-term health consequences to that we're not necessarily seeing. It's not like I eat an avocado from a conventional system and then I'm having some sick reaction, but it's cumulative over time, just like the cesarean birth is going to be allergies and skin conditions and all of these things over time from not having that original microbiology. And none of our food has that high quality microbiology that it did years ago. And so the whole world is basically this, we've sterilized everything to the point that we are not supporting that microbiology that holds our entire system up. Our mental health, our physical health, our gut biome is in control of all of that.
When I think back, there are so many pieces of our conversation that tie together. When I think back to our discussion of children dying shortly after their parents and age 70 versus 90, or in their 90s, being 20 years apart and dying at close to the same time. One of the significant differences of those of our parents and grandparents' generations is the environment that they were born into and what the microbiome looked like in that particular environment. We've known of the dangers of smoking for decades, but there are still communities and cultures where smoking is very popular. And I've been exposed to some of these. And when I have this conversation with some individuals, there is this fairly common refrain that, well, my grandfather smoked until and he lived and was healthy and happy until he was 90. And then at the same time, in parallel, you have 40 and 50-year-olds who are dying of lung cancer and have all these health problems because of smoking. And you ask the question, like, what are the differences? Why is it that some of these previous generations had that resilience? And it's because of the conditions that they were born into and the environment that they were born into, and even from before they were born. But in that early childhood sets the stage for the rest of their life in very profound ways.
I agree. And I grew up on a apple orchard with cows. We raised little baby dairy cows for a neighbor, and we had apple orchards, and I grew up eating dirt and peeing on the side of the road and wiping my nose on bottom of my mom's dress, and not very concerned about washing our hands all the time. And I believe that is part of why I was able to have children late into my 40s and not had any problems, because I was set up correctly in this environment as a child. And my husband grew up in Mexico in an indigenous village where there wasn't a road until 1991. And so we both have this microbiology foundation that gave us some foundational health that I'm really grateful for. But I worry about my children because in leaving the city and moving to the farm in California, once I was there, I realized I had literally moved my children into a valley of Roundup, like everywhere. At first, I was like, we're moving to the country. It's going to be amazing. And it's great life on the farm. But if all your neighbors are spraying Roundup on their lemons and oranges and avocados, there's no way that that's not excessively in our water and in our environment. The thing I'm grateful about the hill country in Texas is that there's not that much agriculture around us. My neighbor does spray Roundup and pre-emergence downstream of me, but mostly people are just like living in the country, and it's like and grazing cows, and it's not really high quality ag land. So that is one benefit.
The other aspect of California agriculture, depending on which region and valley or coast you're talking about, but in some of the valleys, there is next to no air turnover over the course of the growing season. And I know always when I go there during the summer months and I see the haze that is in the valley, do we actually stop to contemplate what that represents and whether we want that in and on our food supply to that degree?
We do not stop and contemplate it. Luckily, I lived in a valley with a lot of airflow. But yes, Ojai was close by, and it's like a bowl, and you drive in and you just can see it. And I always think about that. What are we doing? But honestly, all we can do is keep speaking up. This podcast woke me up to many things over the years, and all we can do is keep speaking up. And that's part of what I'm doing with this restaurant right now, is that we have this platform, and we're on Sunset Boulevard. We're in Pasadena. We have a lot of energy around it. And then people will Google, what is regenerative agriculture? How can I buy? And on the back of our menu, we're having all the farms and the QR code to their direct purchase options. And my hope is that people go home and order from these farms or get some kind of butcher box from a different farm, but that they think, you know what, I've been thinking I want to do that. I'm going to do that because ultimately we all want to do the right thing, but we get distracted in the everyday of life and we justify our actions because we're busy. And so my hope is that each one of these conversations can awaken a person who wakens another person, and that ripple effect of each of us. Just like Graham Saint's TED Talk had me go on this journey. My brother Ryland started Kiss the Ground from that same TED Talk. How many different people, that was just 15 minutes, and it had the ripple effect of that in the world. If we can each do that with our every moment that we have an opportunity to speak up, that's all that we can do. And that's what I'm being led to do, and I'm going to keep doing it.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mollie, for all that you bring, for the work that you're doing with your restaurant and every facet of your life. Thank you for the work with your family. I wish you all success in both of those endeavors, and I look forward to hearing how things evolve for you.
Thank you so much. And thank you. I know Ryland's called you. We were having the leaf cutter ant issue and you were helping us with that. So I appreciate you being available and giving us coaching on those leaf cutter, but the greatest battle of my life right now, Mollie versus the leaf cutter ants. So
That's a problem we can solve.
Thank you so much.
The team at AEA and I are dedicated to bringing this show to you because we believe that knowledge and information is the foundation of successful regenerative systems. At AEA, we believe that growing better quality food and making more money from your crops is possible. And since 2006, we've worked with leading professional growers to help them do just that. At AEA, we don't guess, we test, we analyze, and we provide recommendations based on scientific data, knowledge, and experience. We've developed products that are uniquely positioned to help growers make more money with regenerative agriculture. If you are a professional grower who believes in testing instead of guessing, someone who believes in a better, more regenerative way to grow, visit advancingecoag.com and contact us to see if AEA is right for you. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to working with you.